All right, big shout out to our live in studio audience. Happy to be back. Happy to be back with everybody. Happy New Year's. This is our first actual recorded episode of the new year of 2024. So I'm so excited to be with you all. It's been a wild and crazy ride. I hope you guys all had an amazing holidays listening to some of our favorite episodes and best episodes of 2024. We're so happy to be back with you with a new logo. If you haven't seen that over on Instagram or Facebook or even on the recording pages on Spotify and Apple, we're just so excited to have new logos, all the engagement that was built into those for you guys. So super excited to be here today. Um, and happy 2024 to all. Today, on the Young Dad podcast, of course, we have a guest. I'm a little rusty, so it's been a little bit since I recorded one of these podcasts. I've been so focused over on my sports side of things, on Ball Boy Talk and doing Dynasty Fantasy Basketball. So if you want to check that out, go ahead. But today I have an amazing guest. I have Janice here with me. Janice has a great story about recovery, mixed in with motherhood. Um, and going through those sides. If you guys have listened to the Young Dad podcast for any amount of time, you'll know that this is a topic that's very close and personal to us, as Aaron and I's mother has always struggled with addiction, and hasn't been involved in either of our lives throughout the duration of it. So it's a very near and dear topic to us. Janice is a mother of four. She's a social worker, and just have some great topics we're going to talk about today. So I'm really excited. So Janice, welcome. Great to have you. The audience is excited for you. So go ahead and tell us a little bit about you, your life story, and um, just a little bit about your journey.
Great. Well, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here today because I love talking about helping parents in recovery who are recovering from addiction or even some mental illness, how to help them repair their relationships with their kids. So I am a recovering alcoholic. I'm 10 years sober, but I started out in an alcoholic, dysfunctional family. My dad was, a functional alcoholic, and I was the baby of the family. So my role was to distract, to be cute, to, help hold up the family image. As a young kid, as a teenager, I experimented with alcohol and drugs, really didn't like their effect on me because I was too much of a codependent, even at that early stage. The alcohol and drugs made me feel out of control, paranoid. And so it took a while before I developed a taste for it. But we all have to cope as kids from that. I'm curious with your experience, what kind of coping mechanisms you did. For me, I was an athlete. I put all my energy into sports, and that worked for a long time. It got me a college scholarship. It got me away from home, and then I was naturally drawn to the helping field as a social worker. What did you do as a kid for coping? I'm curious.
Yeah, so that's a great question. Thanks for asking. You know, for me, it was all about distractions. It was always distractions. And I feel that's really, really common for kids, even for adults who are going through the process of coping or getting past it or going through their own addiction and recovery. For me, it was distractions because I didn't want to think about it. Um, Growing up, I grew up in South Seattle for most of my childhood, and then in North Seattle for a little bit, before going to Hawaii for a couple of years in my early teenage years, and then California after that. So those early years, it was really weird. It was really, really weird because I was raised by my maternal grandmother, and so Aaron and I's maternal grandmother, so our biological mother's mother. Just to break that down for the audience in case they don't know what that means right away. Um, and I was a subject to a lot of like questions and a lot of like, where's your mom? Where's your dad? I don't know. I'm freaking 7, dude. Like, what do you want me to say? So it was a lot of distractions, always wanting to play games or sports or just be doing something, always doing something. It doesn't help that I had undiagnosed ADHD. Um, I was great in school. I was super crazy, highly intelligent. Um, I was always top of my class in everything. Reading level was way ahead. Just because I just wanted distractions. Thinking about it now, and then sports came up. I got into baseball. I got into basketball. Got into all the sports. Found some good friends to help kind of get through. But I got into a lot of like pretty serious trouble growing up. I didn't cope with it well. I had a lot of anger. Saw a lot of different therapists, a lot of different counselors. I had crazy anger management issues, and it was all fueled from that place with my biological mother because I had this all this pent up rage and anger because she wasn't there, and so
Mm-hmm.
and I got bullied, I got teased, I got made fun of, all the things. So I didn't cope well, but it was a lot of distractions, much like yourself, athletics, just keeping myself busy, so busy. So
Right. Yeah, I feel for you and that you had to go through that experience. Um, Kids of alcoholics all have different types of experiences, and mine was more confusing than out and out blatant abuse. My parents really had good intentions. They made good efforts to raise us, but
mhm.
they both carried with them. I'm trying to help break that cycle of generational trauma so that, this next generation is not as damaged. But so just to round up my story, I didn't start really drinking until my 40s, until I was done having kids, done being pregnant, breastfeeding, and I started drinking socially in my 40s with kind of like that mommy wine culture. And I
Mhm.
was in denial during that time. I thought, I'm a social worker. I know the signs and symptoms of alcoholism. I've drank socially for 20 years and haven't crossed that line of alcoholism. And that just fueled my denial. And honestly, I believe in the genetic predisposition. And I think I crossed the line in my 40s and became an alcoholic, so that there came a point where I couldn't function without drinking. Does that make sense? I like to think.
No, it makes total sense, and I think you're totally right on the whole genetic predisposition kind of thing. Um, we see it all the time, especially with in the field of like social work and mental health. Like you see just kids that are just at such a disadvantage just because of who their parents are. You know, to
Mhm.
no fault of their own, to not the parents' fault, like they don't expect it or anything. Because there's not enough research out there about everything that can be passed down through genetics. Addiction can very much be passed down through genetics, just like any other disease or illness can be passed through the genetic code because it's a coding. It's made up in your body. It's made up in your mind. It's what you're passing through your genes. So I think that's a really interesting
Mhm.
thing to hit on there.
Yes, and I my background's not in biology or medicine, so I have a good idea of the broken brain and what happens after you become an addict in one form or another, but which I think is important to learn in for addicts in early recovery, to kind of understand how relapse is so prevalent and might help explain with your mom or why many people really struggle all their life with addiction. Because as a side note, one of the things that I did when I was the last year of my active alcoholism was I was trying to control my drinking by using antidepressants, anti-anxiety, and sleep medication. And I was going to AA, I was going to a therapist, but what I didn't realize at the time is that the anti-anxiety and that sleep medication still triggered the addictive cycle. Does that make sense? Like, so I would get off alcohol for a little bit, but the craving was still tremendous until I got off of all of it in treatment. So, anyhow, I drank for about 10 years. I don't know at what point I went from social drinking to alcoholic, but I ended up in treatment. And I thought going into treatment was going to solve all of my family problems. One of my biggest motivations for going to treatment was fear that I was going to lose my kids, that my ex would take them away from me. And so that was a big motivation. And I thought, based on my social work experience, that I'd go to treatment for 4 weeks. We'd get involved in a family program. We'd do some family counseling, and we would be moving forward. But I was really wrong, and I made a lot of mistakes. And I definitely lived the example that even though I was a social worker and trained in marriage and family therapy, you can't objectively look at your own issues. Like you need someone outside of you to point out the things. You're shaking your head like, yes, you get that.
No, 100%.
Yeah.
So I have my master's degree in psychology. And so I work in what's called a WISE program. It's a wraparound with intensive services. Here in Washington, it's one of our state provided through state insurance programs. It's an intensive outpatient treatment for youth and families. But yeah, it's really hard for even the families to see that, or like parents especially, like, oh, I'm the problem. Oh, it's me, kind of thing. And I see that even in my life. Like, it takes my fiance having to tell me something about my oldest daughter. Um, like, oh, hey, do you know this is what's going on? Like, oh, because I just get so lost in it. I just get tangled up with her and get into a whole thing. And then here she comes, like, telling me, oh, this is what's going on over here. And I'm just like, oh, crap, that's really going on, kind of thing. So, um, yeah, you definitely need that. No matter how much you know, even in your own field of the work, like, I'm still lost with my 6-year-old, but I could tell another family that's going through the same thing with their 6-year-old daughter with the same behaviors exactly what to do. But for me, I'm just like, I don't know what the frick to do, because I'm just so lost. So
Yeah. See, that's a great example, of how it's hard to apply good information to yourself, and that why it's really important to seek help and support, which is one of the first tenets that I say to parents who've lost their children or who have not been able to build back a relationship, that you can't do this alone. You got to get help, got to get support. So, in early recovery, my 4 weeks of treatment evolved into 12. And then because in treatment, I finally was dealing with all those early childhood issues that I had masked and covered up through, sports, through those coping mechanisms that made me look like I was a functioning adult. And I ended up during that time focusing so much on me that I created a wall between myself and my family. My treatment center was about 200 miles away from my home, and that didn't help because it made it hard for them to come to treatment and get involved in programs. And my kids at the time were 13, 15, 19, and 21. So they're all very active in sports or extracurricular activities. And it was hard to get them up there. But honestly, the fault was mine because I started to hide behind the program. Well, let me back up. My biggest problem in rebuilding relationships with my kids was denial, not understanding how much damage I had done to them, because I thought because I was mainly a stay-at-home at night drinker that I hadn't damaged them as badly as someone who had gotten DUIs or things like that. I damaged them as much. It's just in different ways. So my first problem was denial. My second problem was fear of them rejecting me, which stems from my childhood. Always being afraid of being abandoned. We moved around a lot. I don't know if you experienced that, but by our family moving around a lot, I learned how to people please, how to be what other people wanted me to be, how to be likable, and how to adapt, but at the same time, not allow myself to get close to people. And because I always figured like, well, we're going to move again. No sense in making best friends here. But and somehow that morphed into my relationships with my kids. I was like, oh, well, we'll work on this when I get home. But I've been gone for 4 months now. We'll work on this. And then, but really it was fueled by fear of rejection, that they were going to reject me, which ultimately they were rejecting me because I was reacting to them very superficially, not explaining to them what was going on, distancing myself more from them. So that's one of the first things I talk about when I do presentations or speaking, or in the book I've written, is that you've got to overcome denial. You've got to look honestly at your part of the program. Part of the problem, and be willing to take risks. My daughter, well, I know it's probably by the time this plays, it'll be long after the national championship, but I attended the University of Michigan. My daughter attended the University of Alabama, and yesterday was the playoff game. And during halftime, we were talking about how I was preparing.
And yesterday, my dogs won. Go Huskies. Let's go.
Oh my gosh. So my team will be playing your team.
Born and raised, baby. No,
oh my
your
gosh.
team is going to lose to my team. That's what you can say right now. But, but go dogs. Go dogs all the way.
Yeah. Well, this will be fun. We'll have to stay in touch and or make a bet on it. I don't know.
100%.
But during that game,
100%.
we talked a little bit about this, and I asked Katie what were the most important things that helped repair our relationship, and what was one of the things I did early on that really damaged. And to be honest, I don't remember every detail because my emotions were towards the game somewhat too. But one of the things that she said that was most helpful was consistency. So that's also one of the things I preach in the book, is that, and it boils back down to, you can't repair relationships with your kids until you're sober or have an aftercare plan or a program for moving forward where you give them some kind of hope in you. And I didn't do that when I was in treatment. I didn't involve them. I was just like, well, they want to keep me 12 weeks instead of 4. And they'd be like, why? That's their recommendation. I didn't want to tell them that I was that screwed up, that I had childhood trauma or PTSD. I was still, in one sense, trying to protect them from my wounds, which only, keeping that secret only hurt them as much as it hurt our relationship. And the other thing that she said, which I caught on to about what damaged our relationship early on, was the fact that I would hide behind the program. I would use the principles of the program to justify my selfishness and self-centeredness. For example, she said, it made me crazy when you would say, well, this is my recommendation from my therapist, as an answer to something that she was questioning me about. It wasn't an answer. To her, it sounded like another excuse or diminishing my taking responsibility. And it didn't explain why or what I was doing. If I just took a little more time to say, what is it that you need to know? Where's this question coming from? What can I tell you to help explain why I prioritize going to a meeting over your brother's lacrosse game? And I didn't do that. So anyhow, to make a long story short, I made a lot of mistakes. I hit an ACA bottom at one point where, like, it finally dawned on me. I was almost 6 months sober. My relationships with my kids were still a disaster, and with my ex. And even though I was working the program really well, I was sober, but I wasn't getting ahead in those relationships. And I hit kind of a bottom. And at that point, I started to actively seek help from my sponsor and my peers in the program, from my therapist. I became willing to address how my adult child of alcoholic issues impacted my parenting. And wasn't really willing to look at that so much before. So it was probably a year a year and a half probably into sobriety where it was 6 months where I started trying to make an effort to actively repair relationships. And it was another year before I could see progress on those relationships, because it was a lot of trial and error. It was a lot of applying my experience and what worked, what didn't, asking for help from the old timers in the program, et cetera, et cetera. I'm curious, like, what are some of the things that your mom has done that's helped your relationship, or at least helped your acceptance or understanding?
Well, I think a lot of it goes back to what you said. The first part, so everything that you've done, she's never done. We have no relationship. I haven't talked to that woman since I was about 15, 16 years old. I'm almost 30 now. She wasn't invited to my first wedding. She doesn't even know she has grandkids. So there's no relationship there. At least with me. She has a very limited relationship with my brother. She texted him on New Year's. She didn't text me. I'm like, okay, cool, whatever. We were joking about it yesterday, and he was like, "Your mom texted me." I'm like, "I don't know who you're talking about." Um, kind of thing. We were just kind of laughing about it, um, but I really like, some of the things that you said can go a really long way in repairing these relationships. The admitting, not hiding behind the walls of it was a recommendation. Kids are so smart. Like they just want to know why. They want the truth, especially if they're older teenagers, because all their life up to that point, you told them, be honest. Tell me what's going on. What's the real reason? Why are you wanting to do that? Now they're smart enough and old enough to be able to put that back on you, and they can call you on it because they are so used to you for their whole life up to that point, calling them on it. Um, And so I think that's so important, being transparent with your kids and letting them know, like, hey, this is what's going on. I'm a mess. I have some extra issues. I have to take some more time here. And then explaining that why. That's something I really push just in general, like explaining your why to yourself, even as well as not everyone needs to know your why and behind it and what's going on, but explaining your why. Okay, why is this triggering me? Okay, no, why is that? Oh, it's why because of this. It's why because of that. And really going deep, 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 deep down to the final core of that why, getting to the very end, that last little stroke of the pen of the why and why, um, and figuring out what's the root cause. Why is it so deep, kind of thing. Um, and then just admitting to yourself, getting out of that denial, I think is really important. Admitting that, you messed up or there's something wrong, or just being able to admit it, especially to those you love and trust and would want to repair that relationship with, I feel is so important. And then the consistency aspect of it. I think that's the biggest part for me. When you were talking about that part really resonated with me because my biological mother was so inconsistent. She was wildly inconsistent my entire life. I remember probably being 6, 7 years old, and the phone calls were just so inconsistent, um, coming in, where my grandma would ask, "Do you want to talk to your mom?" I would be like, "No, I'm good." Even at like 6, 7, 8 years old, like I was so young, like I wouldn't like now. I don't think I would even if my kid's mother called me randomly wanting to talk to the kids. I wouldn't really give them a choice. I'd be like, "Here's the phone. Go talk to your mom." Um, like it's not really a choice for them, but different circumstances, of course. But The consistency is such a huge aspect of all of this, because you have to be consistent, even in your regular parenting, your everyday parenting. You have to be consistent with your kids, because as soon as you're not, or if you're trying to do something new, a new punishment, new reward, new something, new whatever, or you're trying to change something or do something different, like that consistency is the key element in all of it. And if you're not consistent, your kids are going to be like, well, obviously this is too good to be true, or it's not worth it, or anything like that. So I think those are just all really key aspects of it. So my biological mother,
Mhm.
going back to your initial question there, um, when I was 15 or so, I remember going up to my grandma's house, and I lived in California with my dad at this time, um, and we went up to Seattle. I went to go visit my grandma. He went to go visit my sister and her family, and my biological mother was there. She called it like a planned hit or something back then, because we knew she was gonna be there. He knew she was gonna be there and stuff. So we planned it, arrange it to, to kind of screw her over, kind of thing. But basically, in that very limited interaction, what had happened was she pretty much told me the biggest truth I could ever hear. Um, was that, she didn't love me. She never really wanted me. She wished I was never born. And then later, talking to my grandpa, her dad, I had found out that she was going to have me aborted. Um, and that if it wasn't because of him literally threatening her life, then, I wouldn't have been born. And, just so many other things. Like, there was never really an effort to really care or try. It was always hiding behind excuses, hiding behind the addiction, hiding behind, personal traumas, blaming other people all the time.
Mhm.
It was always a blame, this person, that person, your uncle, your grandpa, this person, that person. Oh, well, this thing happened, so that's why I'm doing this now, kind of thing. It's like we're done. And then every time as I got older, probably like 10, 11 years old, every time she would call, guess what? She would be drunk every single
Mhm.
time. Little did I know that's been going on for years at this point. Years. There was very rarely a sober call. So when my grandma would answer that phone, guess who was taking the brunt of it? Her. So I didn't have to.
Mhm.
So I was real appreciative for that, because she'd made sure I was safe and protected from my own mother. Um, and so, when those phone calls would come in, the older I would get, my grandma would end up yelling or screaming, and I'd be like, oh, I wonder who's on the phone, kind of thing. And I would just go back to playing my video game or whatever, turn up the music in my room or something, or just try to not hear them screaming at each other on the phone. Um, then it came to a point, I don't know how many years ago this was. This was several years ago. Um, she had called my grandma, and I'm pretty sure she was intoxicated, given, you know, um, her life. And she had called and just said some really harsh things, and my grandma was crying. She called me, she was crying and just real upset. And so I ended up calling. I think I was actually in town visiting, um, for something, and she had called, and then I had called her back and really just gave her unloaded like every single piece of my mind that I could. Um, so yeah, this was before 2021, which is when my divorce happened. So it had to be 2018, 2019 or something. Um, I just unloaded on her. She had said when my grandma passed away, she was gonna fly out and pee on her grave, and just all these mean, hurtful, harsh things. Like, um,
Mhm.
nothing she hadn't said before. But I was older, and I was, like, what? If you're gonna say something, let's say something, um,
Mhm.
kind of thing, because you're not gonna do that. And so we got really into it, and uh, I gave her a piece of my mind and hung up the phone pretty much. I didn't even let her try to speak or anything. But the thing with her is that something she would always do is she would always try to manipulate. always try to manipulate and be like, oh, well, honey, or, try to get real soft, real gentle, real nice. Um, and I saw right through it because it was like, it was so fake. Um, and so, yeah, it was just that the lack of all those things that you did to repair the relationship is kind of what led our relationship to today. So,
Mm-hmm. I am really sorry you had to go through that. I don't know if you can see my body language, but I'm like shrinking back, and the abuse that you took from her. I'm kind of stunned silent for a moment, but no
you're
buts.
fine.
And
But
I
I
want to say,
wanted to,
go ahead.
I wanted to ask you a question.
Uh-huh.
For you in your work in this sphere, one question that keeps coming up in my mind is that cycle of family dysfunction.
Mm-hmm.
And in this cycle of repairing that relationship with the child or with the addict versus those who were supporting the addict, who's who's the most responsible party for initiating um that rebuild, that re-engagement? um if it's like a parent and a child, let's say the parent's the one in addiction, and then the child's the one they are supporting, who's the responsible one for um initiating that repair?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so this is coming from my personal experience, probably more than anything. Some other professionals might disagree with me, but I absolutely think it's the addict or alcoholic, that it's our responsibility to reach out. And there's a lot of things you've got to be prepared. You got to do your work. You have to have taken responsibility, made some changes. And honestly, that's why it took some of my kids so long, is because they needed to see constructive, positive behavior, safe behaviors first. They needed to see me stay sober. And then they needed to see one of my big mistakes was being superficial, resorting back to that little kid who was cute and playful. And so I believe it's the addict's responsibility. And in the book, I address some of the steps that you can do. But I want to come right to, because I haven't talked in any of the podcasts, and I haven't really done this in any of my speaking engagements, talking about when you break off a relationship. For instance, the healthiest thing for
Yeah,
some people is to dissolve a relationship. And even from the addict's point of view, you're going to have people who never forgive you, who will always judge you. And sometimes the healthiest thing is to let it go, because
I agree. I agree
you
100% with
don't
that.
set
Like
yourself up for more
so
abuse.
one, no, and I think that's so important because one thing I did actually post my divorce a few years ago. It'll be 3 years now this year, which is crazy to think about. But one thing I did post my divorce is I put in all my things and I had some free sessions for BetterHelp, not a sponsor, um, and used those sessions and ended up getting connected with this really cool therapist. And she walked me through what's called forgiveness therapy. And one
Mm-hmm.
of the very last steps of the forgiveness therapy um, is to reconcile when appropriate. If there is meant for reconciliation, then reconcile. But if not, if
Mm-hmm.
reconciliation isn't appropriate or isn't there, then it is what it is. Kind of cut your losses and cut your ties and move on the best you can, kind of thing. It's not
Mm-hmm.
always easy, it's not always possible, but if that's what's best, that's one thing that I've encouraged on this platform before. Last year, 2022, when I was doing holiday episodes, was just encouraging people. If there's a family member or someone at those family get-togethers that you can't stand, you can't get along with, you just don't get along with, that's toxic or whatever, gracefully remove yourself. Have a backup plan. Go sit with Uncle Larry, Uncle Dan on the couch and watch the Cowboys game kind of thing. Make sure you identify your safe people when you walk in. Make sure you know your people. If something's real uncomfortable, don't be afraid to walk away. Everyone else will understand later. That's on them. It's not on you. You need to take care of you. And so if that's what's applicable in your relationship, whether you're the, I feel if you're the addict or not, then you have to make those choices. What's going to be best for you? Maybe it is an unreconcilable kind of thing. Yes, you can forgive them. Doesn't make it right what they did. I think that's something very important for people to understand with forgiveness. It doesn't make it right what they did, but
Mm-hmm.
it gives you peace of mind knowing that, okay, we're good kind of thing. Like, I forgive you. We're moving on. I'm not going to let that affect me anymore. I'm not going to let the emotions, the anxiety, the depression, whatever that comes with that, I'm not going to let those emotions control me anymore. I forgive you for all those emotions that you caused me, but I'm going to choose to let them go and to move on. The one thing that's not going to happen is we're done from there kind of thing.
Yeah, that's great. That's really good. I'm curious too, when you let your mom have it, I think that's how you said it. Did you feel like you were able to
Yeah.
purge some of that stuff? Like, yeah, I think that's an important part of,
Um,
when you go ahead.
I was so young like that. Oh, back then I wasn't that young. Um, you know, it felt I don't know. It was kind of it was what was needed. Definitely there was some pent up
Mhm.
things I was holding on to in that moment. Uh letting them go. Now when I'm asked about my biological mother, I don't get as frustrated or angry. Like even yesterday, my brother was like, "You gotta let this go." I'm like, "I've let it go. I've moved on. I'm just
Mhm.
I'm just not gonna talk to her. I'm just not gonna even explore that path. If she really, really, really wanted to reach out or try to have a relationship with me, then she would. Because I agree with you. Actually, it's on the addict to repair and recover those relationships, especially if it's a parent-child one. I don't think it's on the child
Mhm.
unless the child did something, then the child needs to repair that relationship from their aspect. But for me in this situation, I'm like, that's not on me. Like, I'm not going to go out of my way and repair our relationship because that's not my job. I'm the child
Mhm.
here. I'm the one that's been subject to all her BS over the last however many years since I was a kid. Since I was 2 weeks
Mhm.
old when she, gave me to grandma kind of thing. Like that's not on me. I'm not gonna do that because I fully recognize like that is not my responsibility, and I'm not gonna put that guilt. I'm not gonna put that weight. I'm not gonna put that pressure on myself when I got bigger, more important things to take care of. I got my kids. I got my dogs. I got my fiance now. I have to co-parent, I have to work, I have to do all these things. Like that requires way too much energy and this doesn't deserve that energy that it would need because she doesn't deserve that energy from me kind of thing. And I can objectively look at that. It's like, well, if I put energy here, then where am I taking that energy from? Um, Kind of thing. So it's just really having that ongoing evaluation of that energy and everything for where it's coming from and where it's going to, and if it's worth it. In this situation, it's not worth it whatsoever.
Yeah, I applaud you for that. And you've just given a great explanation about how sometimes it's really important to cut ties for your own self. So, um, I really applaud you for that. I don't know which direction to go from here. Perhaps back to things that parents can
Let's
do. Go ahead.
let's actually jump into the YDP3 here, and
Okay.
get wrapping up here. Um,
Okay.
we could go on for hours about this because there's so much that can do, um, but there's so many things that can be done. Um, but I think we hit on quite a few things already. Taking that accountability
Mhm.
for yourself, admitting you're wrong, being transparent, taking responsibility for your actions, initiating the repair. If you're the addict, and you have to repair relationships, we both agree, at least in this space, that you should be the one initiating that contact.
Mm-hmm.
And then just understanding that you can forgive an addict. That doesn't make it right, but it can bring you peace and that choice and whatnot to feel better and to move on with your life as the individual affected by that one's addiction. Um, so I think there's a ton of little tidbits in here. I appreciate you sharing your story and um, jumping into it with me today. But we're gonna jump into the YDP3 uh, audience. As you well know, the YDP3 is 3 questions that I ask every single guest to get to know kind of what a little bit more about them to leave us on like a really high good place here. So the first question is, where are you rooted? This can be where your roots run, figuratively, literally where you're from, um, your values, different things like that. So like, where are you rooted?
It's a great question. And I have to say that I struggled a lot finding my identity because of growing up and trying to be a people pleaser to everything. And so it's only been in the last like 6 years I can say I understand my most important role, and that is of being a mother. It's still always going to be, even though my children are all adults now, the youngest is 23 or 24. But anyhow, I will always still drop what I'm doing to babysit a grandchild, to take care of a child who's had surgery on their knee. And I am comfortable that I'm rooted in the fact that I finally identified what's best for me. And I don't have to, for in my 30s and 20s, I really juggled with trying to have it all, trying to be a mom and also being a career woman and always feeling like I failed. So now I guess I'm rooted in self-acceptance.
I love that. And
Does
then
that answer the
what
question?
grounds you? 100%,
Oh my gosh.
100%. The next question is, what grounds you? Like, what keeps you grounded? What resets you? What brings you back? Um, and where when you're escalated or when you're really going through it, feeling down in the dumps, what grounds you, what brings you back, what helps you kind of come back into that snap back into, oh, okay, we're good.
Well, there's a fun part to that answer. I mean, a fun answer to that question. And, but what really grounds me is keeping things in perspective, understanding what's really important. I will go to a meeting, listen to an AA speaker, that frame. On the times where I need to vent, I usually call my old temporary sponsor. I know exactly what she's going to say. I'll be like, Jana, let me tell you, I just got to vent this. And I'll tell her. And then 9 times out of 10, she comes back with, Janice, let me tell you about someone who's really got problems. And it helps me put it in perspective that my being stressed out over my day job, the pressures from it is not it's not invalidating my feelings. It's putting them into perspective.
I love that. And the last question here, um, if you could go back in time, or if you were talking to another mom who was in her, 20s, 30s, younger mother who was just really struggling with balancing career, work, life, but also possibly in an addiction or recovery or all those different aspects. What's like your most all-encompassing piece of advice you would give to that struggling mom or to that struggling dad in that situation? Or if it was me and I came up to you and I'm like, Janice, I'm going through it. I can't stop drinking. My kids hate me. I hate myself. I'm really going through it. Like, what do you got for me? Kind of thing.
Okay, you got to get sober first. You just got to get sober first. And I've talked about this before too, that there's a fine line between balancing your sobriety with your role as a parent. And it's tough, but you can't repair relationships with family members or friends until you're sober. So, but there's ways to involve them from the get-go with that too. So, the other thing I want to say before we close is that I really want to instill hope for parents who are struggling. After I went to treatment, I went to a halfway house for women, and almost every woman had different levels of relationships with her kids, and some had been cut off completely. And if you're in recovery, there is hope. You can repair those relationships.
True. No, I agree. There's always hope. Janice, go ahead and tell the people a little bit about where they can find you, contact you, get to know more about you, and a little about that book you keep teasing.
Yes. Okay. So on Instagram, my Instagram handle is parenting underscore the word IN underscore recovery. My website is www.janicejonsondowd.com, which will have updates about the book. I have a publisher, North Atlantic Books, who'll be releasing the book in spring of next year. It takes a lot of steps to get it to ready for publication. And it essentially is written to the addict or alcoholic or someone recovering from mental illness who is struggling to repair relationships. It has everything from a little bit an easy to understand explanation of the broken brain and how that impacts relapses and struggles maintaining sobriety, to tips and tools, myths, mistakes, how to do a great amends, and a little bit about grieving, letting go, healing, and setting those boundaries. I am really proud of it because it's written by an addict who's got the social work background, but it's written to the addict or alcoholic.
I love that. You're going to have to, when there's early release copies, let me know. I'll have to get one from you.
Absolutely.
Sounds like a heck of a book. So Janice, again, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. There's so much more we could get into on this topic of recovery and what that looks like and so much more, but I appreciate all the things we were able to bring to light today in the conversation we had. We hope that you, the listener, you guys enjoyed it. We hope that you like, follow, share, do all the things with it that you would with every other podcast. Make sure you guys go and follow and support Janice. Her handle and everything will be down in the show notes for you guys just to simply click on. Outside of that, Janice, thank you. Really appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
And we'll let the audience do their thing.